Cassie, could you just confirm that you can see the first slide? And I'll...
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, well, morning all, and for those, morning, I did this in the morning last time. I'm Charles Wardman, the Director of Cyber and Managed Service Provision here at Croft. I'm responsible for data security integrity across our infrastructure and our clients. I have been involved in tech since my early teens, and along with the team here at Croft, I've been in the trenches with our clients while we've responded to cyber incidents. And we've learned a lot from that experience, and we continue to build better processes and services to protect the businesses and the people that we look after. In doing so, we built a reputation for top-tier service, driven by procedure, process, and systems alignment. Our reference material for this talk is from Panda Labs, the National Cyber Security Centre, Detica's report to the Cabinet Office on the cost of cybercrime, and the Association of British Insurers, lastly made up with some stuff from Mandiant FireEye, who provide some excellent reporting analysis on trends that we see globally. Today, I'm going to give you a broad update on the targets, values, and trends, and hopefully trigger a lot of questions. These sessions are very much about sharing knowledge and priming you for those questions, so that you can sort of get as much as you can from it at the end. As I said at the outset, this is a lot of information to take in quickly, so we will take a short break, probably 10 to 15 minutes in. It is literally just an opportunity for you to switch camera off, have a wee think, see what you're going to do. So we get the questions at the end. There'll be an opportunity for you to switch cameras on, come forward and ask questions. So top fives. So I'm starting with the top fives because these are really significant, not just because they're top five, but because businesses tend to think that cyber crime, cyber warfare is all about nation state hitting nation state. This does happen, but these are hard targets. As you'll imagine, sort of Chinese government, the People's Liberation Army cyber warfare unit hitting the UK's NCSC is quite difficult. You see this reflected in the cash values that I'll go on to later. Unlike nation state hitting nation state, what we actually see is nation states sponsoring and acting against businesses. Businesses are typically in the top 5 targets in all categories. Now, this isn't just corporates who are frequent flyers in the top 5, it's all businesses in a multiple of categories. The reason for this principle is a low-hanging fruit. Businesses make easy, fat targets who rarely respond to the early signs of an intrusion. So we see here business and professional services at number 1. They've never made it below number 4 in the last 5 years. And then retail, hospitality, finance, healthcare, and high technology. The trends that we see in here, and this is sort of building on that sort of realization that business is the target, is that ransomware has evolved. So like every industry, each new year has brought changes in the approach. So ransomware has now evolved into a multifaceted extortion where actors not only deploy ransomware encryptors across the victim's environments, but they also employ a variety of other extortion tactics to coerce victims into complying with their demands. The shorthand of that is it's not just about messing your files up anymore. What they're looking to do is come in and threaten and extort your staff in order to increase the odds of success. Don't try and break in, just bully somebody to let you in. Second trend we're seeing is dwell time reducing. I'm going to go into dwell time in a little bit later. But the trend here is that as ransomware has increased in both its reach and effectiveness, it's brought down dwell time. Again, I'm going to go into that later. What this means is that we're seeing more smash and grab than before, which isn't a good thing. So rather than entering a network and diligently finding targets of opportunity, we see a lot of straight terminal attacks, which is get in, bust everything up, no questions asked, and run away. The third that we're seeing, which is fairly inevitable, is work from home exploits. Threat actors have taken advantage of the infrastructure supporting work at home with an increased focus on vulnerability and exploitation. So what you can find somebody doing at home is probably more useful to them than what you find them doing at work. A rather unfortunate example of this a couple of years ago, probably more 3 years ago now, there's a scam going around where found passwords in what we call pastes, which is where there's a publicly available list of passwords that have been previously stolen. You would receive an email in your inbox saying we have switched your webcam on, we've caught you watching pornography. Here is our password that we stole from you in order to prove legitimacy. You need to now let us into your work network. What's actually happening here is they're simply pulling a piece of available information together, making an assumption that a lot of people won't have changed their passwords, and then as a result, being able to coerce them into taking some sort of action against the network. The other thing we're seeing at work at home exploits is things like there was a fridge in South Korea that had to be switched off because it was sending a load of spam. Smart thermostats and a lot of IoT devices aren't terribly well looked after. Firsthand, we dealt with a contract finance director whose personal laptop had been breached. They took on a contract at a client of ours, were given administrative logins, and then were able to log in and clean out 9 months worth of payroll and accounting data. The activity was seemingly legitimate because it was done through this person's logins, everything was validated, MFA was switched on, but in reality it was a breach through a home network device. So they're the major trends that we're seeing, and it's quite alarming. We're seeing a lot of push onto users. The stats in this was the Association of British Insurers now placed the average value of an attack in excess of £8,000 per attack. This comes in at about £6,500 for small businesses and about £22,000 for large businesses. And we see 43% of businesses affected on a monthly basis. That is not a business will be affected 43% of the time. It's that 43% of all businesses will experience a breach on a monthly basis. What I'm going to cover next is a little bit of the model to give you some understanding. So this is an official cabinet brief prepared by Deticus that tries to outline the cybercrime industry as it is. Typical association with cybercrime is what we see for individual criminals. So if you look at the top left of this section, you'll see industrial espionage, customer data theft, online theft, and identity theft. And what Deticus are identifying is that's typically driven by individual criminals, people who have got a bit of money, they're motivated to do it, and off they go. What we're seeing increasingly is organised crime, which is what we see at the bottom left. And this is where the output will be business disruption, extortion, and service denial. And they use their increased capability, reputation, and profit to do it. The way that this will often come about is an individual criminal will break into a network. They will then sit in that network. They'll do absolutely nothing, and they will auction access to that network. An organised crime will obviously, bid healthily for that. And what then you'll see is the organised crime will come in and they'll look to do a variety of things. Service denial for me here is quite interesting. Service denial is about simply flooding normally a network with so much information that it is useless. You don't even need to break into it. If you can just overload the thing, then it's as effective as having broken in and deleted everything. And what they're trying to gain from that is damage to your revenue, reputation, and competitive erosion. So getting into your supply chain and sending out nasty emails to all of your suppliers, no matter how much you can apologise for that, it will have had a detrimental effect in terms of PR and so on. And it'll knock your competitive edge. And this is ultimately why we see nation state funding organised crime into this activity, because affecting the whole of the UK by attacking sort of the easiest targets is a far easier way to achieve your goal than it is to try and go after the big fortified targets in government themselves. The next slide here is about marketing insights. So I mentioned there that an individual attacker will come into your network and possibly auction off access. The table that you see on the left, and this is from Mandiant FireEye, is the value of access sold to each type of network. So what you'll see here is government coming at $2,283. It doesn't represent a particularly significant sale. It's hard work and you're likely to get caught. Legal and HR firms who don't make up a large percentage of resale, difficult to get into them, but when you do get in, you can sell access to that network at the minute for £84,000. What we've then got is energy and industrial at 48,000, tech at 32,000. It's critical here to sort of make this point. Getting into your network is one thing, doing damage is what we tend to assume will happen next. That's rarely the case. And often when you do see that damage, perhaps multiple bidders will have bought access to your network before causing damage. And this is comparatively easy stuff to do. There are freeware tools available online to automate a lot of this. So it's a healthy industry, rather, unfortunately. What you see on the right-hand side, which I won't go into in any detail, is the reseller value of stolen credit card information, but we don't need that today. So I mentioned earlier dwell time, and I've alluded to this a lot twice. Dwell time is hugely significant. So global dwell time decreases to 24 days. However, in EMA, so Europe, Middle East and Asia, that actually increases from 54 to 66 days. It's a trend that I've seen in lots of reporting, and it's something we've seen firsthand. The UK is fairly underinvested in cybersecurity, and the stats that you see tend to reflect that. Somewhat alarmingly, 3% of attacks are still over 700 days. There's a point where I tell you what dwell time is. So dwell time is the amount of time between somebody breaking into your network and you being aware that they're in your network. So what you're seeing here is typically somebody will have been in your network for 2 months before you're aware of it and responding to it in any way at all. The other part about this is detections. So while somebody will have come into your network and been there for a prolonged period of time and sold off access, moved sideways, tried to gain leverage over employees, taken information that's going to make it easier for them to get back in over again, notifications and detections. It's horrifying how often a client will mention a funny incident or minor issue or other problem that's indicative of a larger attack. Oh, the MD got a text the other day saying to buy some shopping vouchers. You know, we didn't do it because we knew not to do it. But no credence given to the fact that they knew the names of the right people, which would suggest that there's something more invasive going on. If you hear a story like this, it's very important to respond and say, look, if you're seeing anything like this, anything indicative of an attack, assume that somebody's been in your network for 2 months and then ask the question, what could they have done in that space of time? In terms of the detection piece, external notifications continue to significantly exceed internal. So what this is telling you is that the majority of the time is people outside of your business that will tell you that you've been breached, not people inside the business. In fact, it's only 41% of detections in 2020 are it's daft. What we're then seeing here is this rollout of tools. So detections are predominantly sort of run externally by source. What we've then got is 19% increasing to 22% of attacks are led by freely available tools. So this isn't people with massive skill and resource, it's simply going online, typing in the right things, downloading a tool, and then putting in your address and using it to hit your business. What we have seen in terms of a positive trend is an increase in the amount of ransomware investigations. So this is after ransomware's attacked the network, actually going and trying to find out what happened, how it came about, and then going all the way back. That's increased from 14 to 25%, but that means that still 75% of ransomware attacks aren't looked into in any detail at all. So dwell being the duration between successful attack and awareness. So during this bad time, what the attackers doing, or their software is doing, is identifying those targets of opportunities, flaws, features, or user behaviors that can be exploited. These are important distinctions. Flaws are things that were clearly not intended in the software. Features are things that were fully intended, remote desktop software, per the example I gave earlier. You know, if you can use something that's intended to work the way that it does to damage something, that's far easier than finding a flaw. And then user behavior. And user behavior is what we're seeing this massive increase in, trying to manipulate people into doing what we want. All of these can work together to achieve the bad actor's goal. And as I said, you know, that user behavior piece is about exploiting possibly a combination of a flaw and a feature in order to achieve your goals. What's important to consider here is that with people being in your network, let's say up to 700 days and 3%, but even at 66 days, imagine that you restore from a backup, but only discover when you do it that the bad actor got to there months ago. So we have an example of this where we were called into a Now client because they had been hit by a bad attack. I'm going to go into this in a later webinar in some detail, and they had lost months of data. But every time they recovered, everything shut down again. And it was because the bad actors had actually got into the network some years previously and had been installing their tools into all of the backups, so that every time that the network recovered, they got taken out again pretty much immediately. It's also important in here to mention APT groups. APT groups are, it stands for Advanced Persistent Threats Groups. So these are organizations working on long, often multi-year cycles to achieve their goals. So this 66 days of unknown activity and interception of data and testing and preparing is a long time for a group that's well resourced and financed to think about what they can do within your business. Again, the goal here tends to be, why would you focus on me? What supply chains are you in? What clients do you have? What could we do by getting into your smaller or less secure firm in order to get to the bigger firms? And what's your role in that? What we tend to do is assume that temp groups are who are in your network because it's easier. Temp groups, you know, they're in, they're out, not a lot going on. Temp groups, though, increasingly are selling access into APT groups, so these advanced persistent threat groups, in order to get into your network. And APTs, these were identified in the early 2000s by Lockheed Martin, and they have a methodology they follow called the kill chain, and it's pretty intensive. So the key takeaway from this section that we're up to is to consider the amount of duration that somebody's in your network, what their intent is, and it's unlikely to be that their intent is to gather your information for its own purposes. It will be for some other purpose. Now this is a bit where I've already just fired a lot of information out. What I'm going to do here is pause for no more than 5 minutes. I'll just switch the camera off, give you an opportunity to think back on the slides, and then principally, tee off for questions later. It's a good opportunity to grab a coffee, take a breath break if you want to. So I will start again in exactly 5 minutes from now. I will. So I will pick up from here. I hope we all got a chance to grab a coffee. We've only got a few more slides to run through. As I say, the goal as we come to the end of this is to ensure that you're in a really good place to ask the questions that you want to ask while you've got the time. So the next slide here is about our predictions for 2022. The graph on the right is a visual of the increase in ransomware activity per investigated incident. And what you'll see is that through the run of COVID and the pandemic, we've seen a significant hype up in ransomware activity. The trends that we're seeing that underline that So nation states have become increasingly active. I've mentioned this a couple of times. So they're weaponizing social media to target more enterprise professionals and looking to infiltrate organizations for their own criminal gain. So this is about going online, announcing that you've got a new job on LinkedIn, and then getting a friendly message from somebody to sort of congratulate you, pulling on that thread and trying to wind you in to a situation where we can use your social media profile to our own ends. Could be that we find stuff on there that's compromising, that would be an issue, or simply make friends with you in order to exploit that relationship. The other thing we've seen is a large rise in ransomware as a service. So like a lot of other things, software as a service has become a big thing. So what we're wanting to do here is take the tools that are used and the people and the skills, and rather than having the big cost of entry to get into ransomware, actually just sell it on a per user basis. You know, come to a website, I need some ransomware attacks, please sign up here, £1,000 a month. These are my targets, and away we go. This is the commoditization of the ransomware attack marketplace. What we're also seeing is, as the tools are creating, is nation states increasing their ability by leveraging cyber criminals. So a nation state, rather than having to build these skills itself, can just go to a criminal organization and say, we will pay you money in order to take part in these attacks. The other thread that we're seeing off the back of that is public RAS tools commoditizing. So where the high-end skills and tools and the nation state stuff's going on and the cyber crimes happening, and we're seeing some of those tools become freely available online, because that's hugely problematic, because it means that the cost of entry to become a hacker or a bad actor to do something nefarious is dropping significantly. The other piece that we're seeing is an awful lot of 5G and APIs. So 5G is great because it increases bandwidth. The challenge with 5G is it increases bandwidth. So by making your networks and your devices more accessible, you're also making it easier for bad actors to carry out their attacks. We're also seeing is huge take up of IoT, so Internet of Things, so smart thermostats, smart fridges, smart devices, and these devices tend to be relatively insecure, so they become targets. And then those things are all linked together with APIs. So APIs, application programming interfaces, where two sets of programming talk to one another. And we're starting to see an awful lot of those joining pieces be attacked. The other piece that comes off the back is line of business applications. So our prediction this year, businesses will move increasingly to digital. Is to do that, they'll look to find pieces of software that are perhaps bespoke to them. So they'll actually build something specifically for their business, but not have the prerequisite skills and experience to understand the security that they need to create around that tool that they're making for themselves. So they'll make themselves a nice bit of software for somebody locally, and they're building a lot of dependency upon it. What we'll then see is an attack on that bit of software that'll take it out, and it's a serious impact to their business. We're also zero-day time. So zero-day is an exploit of vulnerability. It's something that a bad actor can use to break your software and get into your network, your tools, to disrupt you, that's previously unknown. Typically, a zero-day vulnerability, when it's found, will be sold online into a marketplace. People will build some tools to take advantage of it, and there'll be this big coordinated attack. The big shift here is that we're seeing all of that happen in hours rather than days. So somebody finds a program problem, they publicize it online, a tool is created to attack that vulnerability, and then that's distributed and lots of criminal activity takes place, and all within a matter of hours. It's a very difficult thing to keep up with. So here, for me, it's about starting to give some ideas to how to respond to some of those threats as we see them. So good security is about understanding the perimeter. So that's the edges of your estate. So I equate this to physical security. It's like having a house, and you should think of it that way. Connectivity is everything that's going in and out. It's the water, the electricity, it's the bits and the bytes. Infrastructure is the foundations of your house. So what you do with the water and the power once you have them in your living space. So this would be TVs, ovens, music systems, anything that you've got running that sort of empowers what comes next. Productivity is then the space that you're in. It's what those foundations facilitate. They allow us to enjoy our home life, to cook food and so on. We then layer security on top of that. Security, like physical security, do you have a burglar alarm? Is it just on the outdoor? Do you have it on the windows? Do you have a camera inside the house? When somebody comes in the house, do you switch the light on and identify them? And a bit like a bouncer, which is a very good example for a lot of how antivirus works. Do you have a blacklist or a whitelist? How does it work? Is it that if I know that you're a bad person, you're not allowed in? So you are a nefarious piece of software that don't want a network, no, you may not enter. Or is it a case of going, actually, we're not letting you in unless you know who you are, which is far more secure, but also quite restrictive. The last piece on top of these layer cake are skills, the experience and resource to respond to a threat as a result of an attack against any of those layers. So each can undermine the other. And that's why we build our stack from templates. It reduces the amount of time hypothesizing about the cause and effect, and that speeds up client attack and response times, because it creates a uniform set of variables to check against. Basically, when we look at a challenge that we're facing, we can much quickly get to a conclusion about what's different, because on the whole, things are very much the same. When you do this, you should be thinking about the interlinked nature of your business services and treating them as a whole. So your telecoms leads to your phone system leads to contacts, your contacts lead to contact software, your contact software needs a home, the home leads to need for security, and then you have to have the skills on top in order to look after the whole thing. And so it's very, very important to look at that whole thing as a whole, because that is the perimeter that you need to protect. And when we're looking at user exploitation as the most reliable means now to damage a business, it's at the very edge of that perimeter that the users tend to interact, on their mobile phone, on their tablet, at home, on a work from home device. And how do we respond to it? So the questions that you want to ask yourself: there's often this significant period, the dwell time, between an attacker gaining access to your systems and the attack itself being launched. So identifying unauthorized access to systems early can help stop the attack. So question 1. Has the board explicitly conveyed the threshold for when it wants to know about an incident? What monitoring is in place around critical assets, like personal data, that would have an impact if compromised, lost, or changed? And bear in mind that an attacker may have gained access through non-critical systems, so your photocopier. Who examines the logs, and are they sufficiently trained? What mechanisms are there in place for staff to report suspicious activity? Are there thresholds for alerts set at the right level? So, when is it worth knowing about a thing? And how confident are you that you know that all the IT stuff in your organization has, or what it is, and what the state of them is? Because many attacks coming through equipment that you're not aware of, things that people have set up themselves and are outside of your purview. The second question, what measures are you going to take? So when somebody comes into your network, they're going to spread rapidly across your systems. So you should consider authenticating movement across the network and granting access only to users who need necessary access to certain systems. Cyber Essentials is a fantastic guide on this, and if you take the Cyber Essentials course but bake it into what you're doing, you'll be in a much better place. How would the organization identify the attacker's presence in the network? Do you have monitoring in place? And how is the network separated so that if an attacker gets access to one device, they don't get access to absolutely everything? Thirdly, as an organization, do you have an incident management plan? Now, this is about saying you should think about when, not if, you experience a serious cyber incident. So it's essential that you've got a planned response and best practice, and there's some guidance on this on the website. But an incident plan should include knowing who your key contacts are. So who's the response team? Who's senior management, legal, PR, and HR, and contacts, insurance? Depends on the scale of your business, but who's going to take charge on telling people what's going on while somebody technically deals with the risk? There should be clear escalation routes. So it should be obvious that we've identified an incident, that we're bringing it to this most senior level of business that's possible, and then critical decision making can be made quickly without the usual sort of slow down and sign off that might be necessary in a larger organization. There needs to be a clear allocation of responsibility. So you need to know who's responsible for what. And you need to have some sort of central contact where you're distributing all the information successfully. This is more challenging in a cyber incident because often the distribution would come through the use of a tool. So even a conference room telephone number is a good idea. You should also be aware of the regulatory oversights. This would be GDPR. And what contingencies do you have for critical functions going under? For me, I break this down into management and technical track. Technical are busy restoring systems. What are management doing in order to keep the business running without access to those systems. And part of disaster recovery planning is understanding how you would do that and what your response would be. And in doing that, you start being able to get an idea of the value that you place on the disruption, and that makes it all the more easy to budget for what you should be spending on, cyber resilience. The incident management plan, so this point 4, does it meet the particular challenges of attack? Well, this is why this webinar is important. Understanding the key threats that you're likely to face in the year ahead: ransomware as a service, nation-state sponsored criminal activity for easiest access, and then user exploitation. Does your incident management plan deal with that? So do you have an open environment where people are happy to put their hand up and say that they've identified something? It's an obvious thing, but a cultural change is sometimes required in order to have good cybersecurity. How would we respond to a ransom demand? Who would make that decision? The advice generally is don't, but would you, wouldn't you? Where does your insurer stand on that? And are you prepared for a recovery that could take weeks or months? So rather than just, we've been hit, we need to run as fast as we can, what do you do in a situation where you've been told you're going to be offline for 3 months? There was a large Norwegian or Scandinavian lumber company who in this situation who actually had to bring old hands back who knew how to use filing cabinets and lever arch files in order to run the business while the IT people got everything back up and going again. Are you prepared for that? And then lastly, how's your data backed up? You've got to consider, will your backups be safe in the event of an attack? You can't assume that you can just restore to a backup, because what if they're in the backup, as I referenced in that example earlier? So will your backups remain unaffected by attack or infection? Within those backups, what data is critical and how frequently is it backed up? How frequently is the non-critical data backed up? And how confident are you that you'll be able to recover from those critical and non-critical backups? A good example there is if you back up all your data into the cloud and you have a large data store, it could take a very long time to simply move that data over your internet connection. So while you've got very good backup and it's never been an issue because it's been incrementally uploaded, on the day where you have to restore 100% of it, can you get it back into your network quickly enough in order to get back up and running? How are they stored? Are they offline, online, cloud? And does the backup policy follow the principles or best principles that exist? Again, best principles we'll cover in a later webinar. So the next steps. So I'm going to run 2 further webinars where we're going to look at tracking behavior and the behavioral patterns used within cyber to create a picture of you. So this is about that social media manipulation and the threats that follow and what you could be doing there in order to minimize the risk that you face from that particular attack. The other thing I'm going to cover is zero trust principles, and we're doing this, I think, in March. Zero trust principles is a pretty solid set of 3 things. Give people as little access as you possibly can do, assume that you're constantly in a state of breach, and then act accordingly, and work from there. And using those principles, while they might not be fit for every business, starts giving you some reference point to think about how you actually can tackle this in a meaningful way that doesn't require going down too many rabbit holes. That's the end of the presentation. I've included back there references to material that was used, but I hope you've got questions. If you pop your hand up, given the number of people who are in the call, we'll be able to call people forward based on sort of who puts their hand up first. Should be able to.
We've got one in the chat from Sarah saying, what would the first step be for businesses looking to protect themselves from these attacks?
It's a very good question. It's probably a question that turns on its head. You need to think about what you have and how that affects you, rather than starting with how do you protect yourself from something. So it's very much like the physical analogy in a house. How do I protect myself against an SAS team wishing to get into my home? So, well, I'm not going to be able to, they're going to get in. But what's the impact of that on my business? And then from there, start working backward to determine how much resistance needs to be put up. What other things do I need to put in place so that I can recover? And often the question is really, how would you recover from an attack and endure one, rather than prevent it in the first place? And the obvious way to prevent it is to try and go as dark as you can do on the internet, but that's very challenging in a world that's increasingly connected. So I would suggest that it's those latter points. It's think about what have you got that's of value, how do you endure, how resilient are you to an attack, and then you go, where do you go from there? And the answer to the resilience is tools. What are the tools you're using? Are they uniform? Are they quality, and are they supported by people who have relevant accreditation and skills, or are you simply sort of wishing for the best? And then once you move from past resilience, it should flow that your backups and things are also using good tooling and good people, and there isn't much more to it than that. I hope that answers the question, Sarah, but do go for more if not. Alex Miller, I'm conscious you put your hand up, so I'll take your question and then come back to Lee, who's asked a question.
Hi there, Charles. Thanks very much for that. That was really useful and informative. Actually, there's quite a lot there that I think I've sort of learned a couple of bits from. My question was, so in the instance where you've got you obviously made the point that dwell time could be quite high. You could have like 66 days of dwell time, and potentially then so I'm fairly happy with our server stack at the moment in the way that it replicates, and we have clustering as well, and I also have physical backups as well that I do 7 days a week and then rotate drives. But in the incident happening where I've got something that's been flagged up and I realise that it goes back way beyond our backup, then is that everything that's contaminated, and then how do you recover from that? So my question is there a standard way to counter high dwell time in an attack?
Brilliant question. So I'll give you a running example of that client that I mentioned earlier who's in this situation. So they've lost 2 years of data. The short answer is to say that my responsibility to them at that point was to say, you have lost 2 years of data. Right. There is no recovering it. They've been in your backups far too long. You will need to reconstitute what's there in some way, and it's then following a process of rebuilding the network and then bringing data back in isolation through a sandbox processing if you need to establish what hasn't been compromised. And there's some shortcuts you can take to do that. But in terms of avoiding the infection in the first place, it's the same principles as protecting the rest of the network. You need to keep everybody out in order to stop them ultimately getting to the backups. And what we do see in targeted attacks often is that the backups are the first thing that they go for, because ultimately a ransomware attack's not a lot of use to you if the client can just go, naff off, shut it down and restart from backup. So it's what's the value of the data? What's the impact to the business? And you have to effectively have a write-off where you say, look, we can lose X amount of periods worth of data, and this is how we would recover from that. And it's about having an exploratory conversation. And then I think a lot of the time, understanding that risk, insuring against it if you can do, but insurance isn't the solution to everything, but simply at board level going, I've got it. Yeah, that's the risk that we run. And actually, when we're making decisions about whether or not you can connect your iPad to SharePoint, no, and this is the reason why. So does that cover that?
It does, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's like you said a moment ago. If the SAS want to break into your home, what you're going to do about it? Well, probably not very much. So I guess you take all reasonable precautions that you can, but sometimes there is just like you said, that's the risk environment you work within, and you have to make sure that's communicated to everybody, and we will understand that very well. I suppose I'm just thinking about what tooling, as you mentioned, could be used to isolate and protect the backups, so that you might have something to come back from in the event of a high dwell time.
So signals intelligence is what really matters there. So it's about we run types of monitoring on activities where actually something that we're just pushing through at the minute, where we would look at peer activity as well as individual user activity. Right. And you're looking for breaks in trends through lots of monitoring that would suggest that something unusual is happening, and then you surface that to a technical professional who can go, I see something unusual going on here. We need to go and look at it and respond. And the goal there is to try and catch it before it happens. And there's a lot of development in that space at the moment. I'd be happy to talk to you about it offline if you want to. There's some stuff you can do.
Yeah, I think that's quite useful. I mean, I've been reading a bit about that kind of like behavioural tracking domain that's sort of up and coming, and then that's how you kind of identify these potential attacks or potential, the sort of the start of something that's about to happen. So yeah, that'd be interesting to me to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, happy to pick up on that. Honestly, I'll get Cassie to drop you a line and we can pick up offline.
Thanks very much.
At all. Of course, Lee, I'm going to move on to what steps should a business take to ensure that their data is secure when users are working from home, and what preemptive measures can be taken in order to identify possible. Actually, Lee, this to a great extent feeds into the question that Alex was asking about backups. It's much the same principle. In order to ensure that your data is secure when users are working from home, it's about least privileged access. When you add somebody to your network, you should be considering why you're adding them to it, and what do they need, and what's the minimum that I can give them in order that there is little risk as possible to the rest of the network. And that's what we should be doing home users, and probably more so because as a business, we've got no visibility of what's going on in somebody's home. So we don't know if there's 10 compromised laptops. We don't know if they're running a bit mining farm, you know, and have highly capable tech. You just don't have that visibility. So least privileged access, reduce it as much as we can do. And that's the first preemptive measure. The second thing to do is a bit like as mentioning Alex there, the kind of tools that we should be deploying should be looking at habits and behaviors and looking for anything that's unusual or inconsistent with a typical behavior, not just of that user, but of that user and their peers. And that's the kind of stuff that we see Microsoft sort of rolling out. Sentinel is a big part of that. There's a couple of other applications, but you're countering spying on people with spying on people. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a better way. The other thing to do is training. Cyber awareness training, sitting users down and saying, be aware of the risks that you're running online, because it's all fine and well focusing on the damage that a business can suffer as a result of this, but there is a personal knock-on for that, and there is personal fraud. You know, there's been a massive increase in the amount of phishing and fraud committed against individuals this year as well. So it's getting them on side, getting them focused, and then, you know, only giving as much access as they need. That answers that question. Anybody got anything else? Looking for hands up or comments in chat window, or feel free to jump forward and switch your video on. So pick up Julia's questions here. So sorry she missed this, but the average cost of a cyber attack. So Association of British Insurers average cost at the minute is £8,000 for an attack, but it's saying it's a larger. The figures I'm quoting here from top of my head, but it's definitely circa 22,000 for a large organisation per breach, and it's circa £6,000 for a small to medium business. But bearing in mind that that is based on insurance information, and the majority of issues are not reported. So that's where the insurers got involved and there's been a payout. We can assume that the damage is then equal to that where there isn't insurance in place, or greater, because the organisation is doing it. There tends to be quite a lot of shame around this. You know, people get breached and they don't want to tell anyone, certainly don't want to tell the ICO because they don't fully understand what their responsibilities are. And subsequently, they just toil with it. The easiest answer is if dwell time 66 days, and we can assume that you could have a terminal attack, so we could take you out completely. What is 66 days of revenue? And a percentage of that is what you're being affected by. Julia, let me know if there's any follow-on to that. Cool. No. Anybody else got anything that they want to fire forward? And don't worry, no matter what it is. Oh, if a house is so disorganized, which in my opinion leaves them vulnerable, would it be more advisable to tidy up or start from scratch? Okay, so I suppose the question here is that if you come into a network and a situation that is too chaotic to get your hands around it, do you start from scratch? And my own feeling is yes, but this is subjective probably more than anything else. Because you've got multiple stakeholders involved in any kind of IT deployment, understanding is crucial to the successful deployment of anything that you're doing. If you've got something that is poorly understood or unloved, badly received by the team that's currently in place, you're going to have a real challenge trying to bring that business along on this journey towards something that's far more effective for them. So coming in and saying that we'll parachute or helicopter drop, whatever your preferred analogy is, a new solution into that environment is a really good way to do it. Challenge is it's expensive. You know, how far do you go? Are you replacing all of the laptops, the PCs, the tablets, the phones? Are you taking servers off site? There's obviously always going to be a middle ground there. the goal should be to set a good strategic vision for where you need your network to be and identify how quickly that you can get there, and then have it in constant review, so that every 12 months you're sitting down and having a conversation with an informed professional who can say, look, these are the challenges that we face today. These are the challenges we're likely to face over the next 12 months. You know, are you ready for them? As we go. Chris, let me know if you have any follow up to that. Now, so picking up for your question, not a security expert. However, effectively, are we saying, does the Cyber Essentials cover against all kinds of hack, or is it a case of having Cyber Essentials award, which then allows procurement? Yeah, okay, bloody good question. There's a lot of people who get Cyber Essentials in order to tick a box, because it's very, very easy to jump through it. I think it is a very good program. Yeah. If you don't just jump through it and you actually go through Cyber Essentials and embrace what it's telling you to do, you're in a really good posture from the off, and you will stand up. It's not going to prevent you from getting hacked, but it's make that discipline in that you need to be in a better place when it does. I think it does typically sort of drop your insurance premium so that when it does happen, you've got recovery. You know, there's great things you can do. We had a client of ours who, again, we often would have people on board when they were in the middle of an attack. And what happened there was they had 16 servers, everything was wiped out, and they had a 6 to 8 week recovery time to come back from that. They put their claim in with the insurer, but because they were a very organized organization, they had a clear vision to move to the cloud. They wanted to do that anyway. So what they did was they took the insurer's money, accelerated the plan in order to move into the cloud at the same time, rather than recovering to where they were. Had they not had that organizational discipline, which for me is where Cyber Essentials starts, they'd have never been able to do that. There'd have been too much boardroom discussion about where we go next.
Cool.
Yeah. So, or does it help with procurement? I think it helps with procurement too. So, definitely do it, but do it properly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Anybody got anything else? Excuse me, I'm flicking between the hands up section and the chat window. Cool. Okay. Well, look, if nobody's got any final questions, I think I can round out at that. As I say, the next talk that we're going to be doing is on tracking and behavioural modification. That's less daunting than it perhaps sounds. It's about actually understanding how somebody going to extort one of your staff members into buying £1,000 of Amazon vouchers, and how do you respond to that in terms of your security piece. And then you're getting into actually how we can help with that. The goal of these webinars is to give you the information that you need to respond, to give you an opportunity to ask questions at the end of them that allow you to respond. Big fan of knowledge you can have for free, my experience you can pay me for. So it's only the bit where you're sort of pulling us over the line that we come up and give you a price. So yeah, thank you very much for your time, everybody. Any questions, fire them on to us following the follow-up from the end of this.
Excellent.
Boom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Charles.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Charles.
Thanks.
Thanks.